Shockwaves over an unexpected upset victory. Everyone expected the second most powerful man in the U.S. House of Representatives to easily win his re-election bid in Virginia's Republican Party primary. After all, Eric Cantor had outspent his opponent more than 20-1. But when all the votes were counted, Tea Party-backed candidate David Brat came out on top.
The reason we won this campaign, there's just one reason, and that's because dollars do not vote. You do.
I know there's a lot of long faces here tonight, and it's disappointing, sure.
Why did it happen? And how will the Republican Party react?
This was a smackdown. This was voters less than 2 hours from Washington, D.C. saying we don't like the direction the country is headed, and we don't like the Republican leadership's response to it.
In his concession speech Tuesday night, Cantor described himself as a conservative.
And we need to focus our efforts as conservatives, as Republicans, on putting forth our conservative solutions so that they can help solve the problems for so many working middle-class families.
But Virginia voters didn't buy it. Tea Party members and other conservatives viewed Cantor as the ultimate insider, close to Wall Street, an establishment Republican. And Brat, an economics professor from Randolph-Macon College in Ashland, Virginia, capitalized on conservative dissatisfaction with Cantor and ran his race as an anti-establishment candidate.
The basic premise is power belongs to the people, and that's what we're going to do.
While this was a shocking upset, an amazing comeback victory for the Tea Party, what is unclear this time is the impact it may have on the Republican Party and the fall congressional campaigns. Will Republican Party leadership embrace a conservative agenda or a more moderate one in hopes of defeating the Democrats? Two main issues dominated Brat's winning campaign against Cantor: overspending, the massive budget deficit, and immigration reform. Brat accused the House Majority Leader of wanting to give citizenship papers to illegal immigrants.
Essentially, Cantor got clobbered by a political novice who had a fraction of his money to spend, and that ought to send a message to the leadership in both parties, but I'm not sure it will.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. Well, joining us now with more is the son of a very famous Russert who did meet the press for so many years, Luke Russert, who covers Capitol Hill for NBC News. Luke, it's good to have you with us today.
Good morning, Reverend.
Listen, what do you think the deal is? It's almost if you're Machiavelli, you'd set up a Tea Party to destroy the Republicans. What do you think? What's their game?
Well, I think it was a shocking upset last night in Eric Cantor's home district, and while a lot of folks are making this out to be sort of Tea Party versus establishment, there certainly is an element of that. But I look in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham faced a lot of Tea Party challengers, and he was able to beat them back. Mitch McConnell was able to do that a few weeks ago, and you now see there's a runoff in Mississippi between Thad Crocker and Chris McDaniel, the Tea Party-backed candidate. I think in Cantor's district specifically, it's the age-old thing which often happens if a politician goes to Washington. They become big, they have a national profile, they go around the world, they're always on television. Some people feel that they begin to lose touch with those voters in their district. And Eric Cantor is a fascinating example. He's somebody that outspent his opponent, in this case 15-1. He spent $168,000 on steak dinners for his campaign. His opponent spent $200,000 for his entire campaign. So when you start looking at this, you sort of see, okay, he lost 56-44. There was a lot of folks who were perhaps disenchanted with Eric Cantor, the power of the incumbency in this moment, and also I would say did not realize one thing they were doing, Reverend, and you touched on this earlier, which I thought was a smart point. Eric Cantor is in line to be Speaker of the House. The seniority that they voted out last night will have a huge effect on that district in the future, because they go from being represented by number 2 to number 1 eventually in the next few years to someone who could be 432 by the end of the day. I think that point was probably lost on those primary voters, but there is a real wave of anti-incumbency feelings right now, sort of throw all the bums out.
Well, the bums, I mean, you know, if the Republicans get thrown out, the Democrats win. I mean, look at Sharon Angle and some of the other races that they were winnable in this last time around. Now they don't, they've lost the majority of the Senate. What do you think? I mean, do you think they're...
Well, I think in the Senate, I think you're right. I think there is an element of not having nominees who could be controversial. Look at Kentucky. Matt Evan, a Tea Party nominee. He lost to Mitch McConnell. Allison Grimes, a Democrat there, would have had an easier time going against him than she will have against Mitch McConnell. She's now definitely the underdog. In Mississippi, there are a lot of folks that feel, even though it's a very conservative Republican state, if this gentleman, Mr. McDaniel, were somehow able to beat Thad Cochran in a runoff, which is a possibility, that could open up the door to a Democrat representing Mississippi, which would be extraordinary in this day and age. So I certainly agree with you that the outside, more conservative elements of the Republican Party could have a detrimental effect on the general election prospects. In this race specifically, though, for Eric Cantor, although he had his own problems about being out of touch, what does it mean for 2016? Because any Republican congressional candidate or even senatorial candidate who is thinking about becoming more moderate on issues like immigration, perhaps on things like education spending or whatnot, now really has to look at themselves and say, look, do we risk becoming primaried from the right? And is that the direction we want to go? That is where I agree with you. I think that opens up a huge window for someone like Hillary Clinton to walk through and not even have to go so far to the left in her own primary and walk the middle lane all the way to the presidency.
Well, it's like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It's just crazy. But take the issue of immigration. The Republicans have got to make nice to the Hispanics. They've got to do it, but they're perceived as anti-Hispanic. What do they want on immigration, and what was the problem that you saw with Eric Cantor and immigration?
It's interesting. I've been covering this issue for a long time on the Hill, and the sticking point always comes down to border security. But when you give them the question, especially House Republicans, what constitutes securing the border, there's never really a clear answer. The Senate passed a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Folks like John McCain, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, Lamar Alexander, that bill contained billions of dollars to not only up the force of Border Patrol agents, there are things like drones, more intense weaponry there on the border to stop the flow of illegal immigrants. So when you ask the question to a lot of House Republicans, they don't give you a straight answer. They say securing the border. Bob Corker, a senator from Tennessee, said probably what was in that Senate bill was overkill. So until that question of what constitutes securing the border for a lot of House Republicans is figured out, I don't think they'll move on immigration reform. And a lot of that happens to be because their districts are not majority Latino. Only a few of them are. I believe it's less than 20 in the House GOP conference. So there's not the impetus to move like there are for those statewide senatorial candidates. But you touch on a very important point. Look at the demographic numbers. The United States is becoming much more Latino as the years go by. A lot of them are reaching the age of 18 and are becoming voters. And if the Republican Party continues to alienate them on this issue, they risk being in second place, at least in the national election, for a long time.
Look, you're right. They're going to lose, the Republicans lose California. They lose possibly Texas someday down the road. They lose New Mexico.
Texas could be purple, sure.
Yeah, all the way. Anyhow, look, you're going to be talking to a very lovely lady in a few minutes about your new book, so I won't take that up. I talked to your father one time about Big Russ, and so you've got your book, and we'll let you talk about it. But thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.